The Antigonus notebook is in the apartment across the kidnappers. Although it was very coincidental, Klein believed that his intuition was correct. He immediately got out of bed and rapidly changed out of the old clothes he usually wore to bed. He picked up a white shirt beside him and draped it on, quickly buttoning from top to bottom. 1, 2, 3, he suddenly realized that he was missing buttons. The left and right sides did not seem to match. On careful look, Klein realized that he had made a mistake buttoning the first button, causing the shirt to warp. He shook his head helplessly before taking a deep breath and slowly breathing out, using some of his cogitation techniques to restore his calm. After putting on his white shirt and black trousers, he barely managed to wear his armpit holster steadily. He pulled out the revolver he hid under his soft pillow and holstered it. Without time to tie a bow tie, he draped his formal suit on and with a hat and cane in each hand, he walked to the door. After putting on his heel-filled top hat, Klein gently twisted the door handle and walked into the corridor. He carefully closed his bedroom's wooden door and sneaked downstairs like a thief. He used a fountain pen and paper in the living room to leave a note, informing his siblings that he had forgotten to mention that he had to be early for work today. The moment he was out the door, Klein felt a cool breeze and his entire being calmed down. The street in front of him was dark and silent without any pedestrians. Only the gas lamps illuminated the streets. Klein took out his pocket watch from his pocket and snapped it open. It was just 6 in the morning and the crimson moonlight had not completely faded away. However, there was a hue of sunrise over the horizon. He was just about to seek out an expensive for-hire carriage when he saw a 2-horse, 4-wheel trackless carriage approaching him. There are public carriages this early in the morning. Klein was puzzled as he went forward and waved for it to stop. "Good morning, sir." The carriage driver stopped the horses skillfully. The ticketing officer beside him had his hand to his mouth while yawning. "To Zoutland Street." Klein scooped out 2 pennies from his pocket and 4 halfpence. 4 pence, the ticketing officer replied without any hesitation. After paying for the ride, Klein got onto the carriage and found it empty. It exuded a clear loneliness amid the dark night. "You are the first one," said the carriage driver with a smile. The 2 brown horses widened their pace as they proceeded briskly. "To be honest, I never imagined there to be a public carriage so early in the morning." Klein sat near the carriage driver and made idle chatter to divert his attention and relax his tense mind. The carriage driver said in a self-deprecating manner, "From 6 in the morning to 9 at night, but all I earn is £1 a week." "Are there no breaks?" inquired Klein in bafflement. "We take shifts to rest once a week." The carriage driver's tone turned heavy. The ticketing officer beside him added, "We are in charge of plying the streets from 6 to 11 in the morning. Following that, we have lunch and an afternoon break. Near dinner time, which is 6 in the evening, we replace our colleagues. Even if we do not need rest, the 2 horses will need it." It wasn't anything like that in the past. There was an accident that should not have happened. Due to fatigue, a carriage driver lost control of his carriage and it toppled. It resulted in us having shifts. Those bloodsuckers would never become this kind so suddenly otherwise. The carriage driver scoffed. Under the illumination of dawn, the carriage drove towards Zoutland Street and picked up 7 to 8 passengers on the way. After Klein was less tense, he did not converse further. He closed his eyes and recalled the experiences from yesterday, hoping to notice if he had forgotten anything. By the time the skies were bright when the sun was fully up, the carriage finally arrived at Zoutland Street. Klein pressed his hat with his left hand and briskly jumped off the carriage. He quickly stepped into 36 Zoutland Street and arrived outside Blackthorn Security Company after going up the flight of stairs. The door was still closed and had yet to open. Klein took out the ring of keys by his waist and found the corresponding brass key and inserted it into the keyhole and twisted it. He pushed forward as the door slowly opened. He saw the black-haired, green-eyed Leonard Mitchell sniffing at a recently popular cigarette. "To be honest, I prefer cigars. You seem to be in a rush," the poet-like Nighthawk asked in a relaxed and cozy manner. "Where's Captain?" Klein asked instead of answering. Leonard pointed at the partition. "He's in the office. As an advanced sleepless, he only needs 2 hours of sleep in the day. I believe it's a potion those factory owners or bankers would like the most." Klein nodded and quickly passed through the partition. He saw that Dunn Smith had opened the door to his office and he was standing at its entrance. "What's the matter?" Dressed in his black windbreaker, he held a gold-inlaid cane with a solemn and stern expression. "The feeling of déjà vu came to me. It should be the notebook. The Antigonus family's notebook." Klein tried hard to make his answer clear and logical. "Where was that?" Dunsmith's expression did not have any obvious changes. However, Klein's intuition told him that a clear and invisible stir had happened in him. This was possibly a flash of his spirit or a change in his emotions. "It's at the place Leonard and I saved the hostage yesterday. Opposite the kidnapper's room. I didn't notice it back then until I had a dream and received a revelation." Klein did not conceal anything. "From the looks of it, I missed out on making huge contributions." Leonard, who had walked to the partition, chuckled. Dunn nodded slightly as he instructed with a solemn expression, "Get Kenley to replace old Neil's watch of the armory. Let old Neil and Fry come with us." Leonard stopped acting frivolous as he immediately informed Kenley and Fry, who were in the Nighthawk's entertainment room. One of them was a sleepless and the other was a corpse collector. 5 minutes later, the two-wheeled carriage that came under the jurisdiction of the Nighthawks began driving down the sparse streets in the morning. Leonard wore a feather hat, a shirt and a vest. He stood in as the carriage driver, lashing out a whip from time to time, sending out a crisp crack. Inside the carriage, Klein and old Neil sat on one side. Facing them were Dunsmith and Fry. The corpse collector's skin was so white it looked like it either had not been under the sun in a very long while or he had a severe blood deficiency. He looked to be in his 30s with black hair and blue eyes. He had a high nose bridge and his lips were very thin. He had a cold and dark demeanor and had a faint smell from often touching corpses. "Repeat the situation again in detail." Dunn adjusted the collar of his black windbreaker. Klein stroked the hanging topaz in his sleeve as he began from their mission commissioning until the dream. By the side, old Neil chuckled. "Your fate seems to be entwined with that Antigonus family's notebook. I never expected you to meet it in such a manner." "That's right. Isn't this too much of a coincidence?" Thankfully, Leonard just mentioned that there was no indication of hidden factions of mysterious powers at play from the preliminary investigations of Elliot's kidnapping. It was solely a crime motivated by money. "Otherwise, I would really suspect if someone had deliberately arranged for this to happen." Klein found the situation rather curious. It was too coincidental. Dunn did not express his ideas as he was in deep thought. Likewise, corpse collector Fry maintained his silence in his black windbreaker. Only when the carriage stopped at the building mentioned by Klein was the silence broken. "Let's go up. Klein, you and old Neil walk behind. Be careful, very careful." Dunn got off the carriage and pulled out a strange revolver with a clearly long and thick barrel. He stuffed it into his right pocket. "All right." Klein did not dare take point. After Leonard found someone to watch the carriage, the 5 Beyonders walked orderly into the building. With very light footsteps, they arrived at the 3rd floor. "Is this the place?" Leonard pointed at the apartment opposite the kidnappers. Klein tapped his glabella twice and activated his spirit vision. In this state, his spiritual perception was enhanced again. He found the door familiar as if he had once entered it before. "Yes." He nodded in affirmation. Old Neil also activated his spiritual perception and after observing carefully, he said, "There's no one inside, nor are there any spiritual glows of magic." Corpse collector Fry added with his hoarse voice, "There aren't any evil spirits." He could see many spiritual bodies, including evil spirits and restless wraiths, even without activating his spirit vision. Leonard took a step forward and, like yesterday, punched the door's lock. This time not only did the surrounding wood shatter, even the door lock flew and fell noisily to the ground. Klein seemed to feel an invisible seal instantly vanish. Immediately following that, he caught a whiff of an intense stench. "Corpse, a rotting corpse," Fry described coldly. He did not appear to suffer from nausea. Dunn reached out his black-gloved right hand and pushed open the door slowly. The first thing that they saw was a chimney. For early July, there was an abnormal heat emanating the room. In front of the chimney was a rocking chair. Sitting on it was an old woman dressed in black and white. Her head hung low. Her body was abnormally large. Her skin was blackish green and swollen. It felt like she would explode from a simple prod, spewing a foul rotting stench from within. As maggots and other parasites squirmed between her flesh, blood, and rotting juices, or clothes and wrinkles, they appeared like points of light in spirit vision. They seemed to cling close to an extinguished darkness. "Pa! Pa!" The old woman's eyeballs dropped to the floor and rolled a few times, leaving behind a yellowish-brown streak. Klein felt disgusted and being unable to tolerate the putrid stench any longer, he bent over and puked. "Yug! Yug!" Klein squatted there, vomiting involuntarily. He was soon done with his puking since he did not eat breakfast. At that moment, a tin-colored square flask that looked like a cigarette box appeared in front of him. The mouth, which had lost its stopper, emitted a mixture of smells akin to tobacco, disinfectant, and mint leaves. It cleared up Klein's nose and rejuvenated him. The pungent smell continued to linger, but Klein no longer felt nauseous. He soon stopped vomiting. He traced the tiny flask up and saw a pale hand that did not seem to belong to a member of the living. He saw the mouth of a black windbreaker sleeve and saw corpse collector Fry with his cold and dark bearing. "Thank you." Klein recovered completely, and with his hands on his knees, he stood back up. Fry nodded without any expression. "It'll be fine once you are used to it." He put back the flask stopper and put it into his pocket and turned around, walking to the highly decomposed corpse. Without gloves, he began examining the old woman. As for Dunn Smith and Leonard Mitchell, they paced slowly around the room, occasionally touching the table surface or newspapers. Old Neil pinched his nose and stood outside the door, grumbling in a muffled voice, "Seriously gross. I'm going to request for additional pay this month." Dunn turned his head over and touched the wall beside the chimney with his gloved right hand. While doing so, he asked Klein, "Does this place look familiar?" Klein held his breath and constructed the silver pocket watch in his mind to calm down. With him already in his spirit vision state, he immediately felt different. A scene that came from the deepest recesses of his memories flashed past his eyes. Chimney, rocking chair, table, newspapers, the rusty nails on the door, tin cans inlaid with silver. The scenes were dark and dull, like a documentary from Earth. However, it was even more blurry and illusory. The scene quickly stacked against what Klein was seeing. The feelings of déjà vu and having been here before presented themselves clearly. An illusory and ethereal scream seemed to pass through invisible walls. "Hornacis, Flagria, Hornacis, Flagria, Hornacis, Flagria. It feels a little familiar." Klein answered honestly while his brain felt a stabbing pain. Thankfully, he quickly tapped his glabella twice. Hornacis, the Hornacis mountain range that appeared in original Klein's diary. That is content that was deciphered from the Antigonus family's notebook. The murmurs were very similar to one of the previous ones. It involved the word Hornacis. Is this a form of enticement? Klein was gripped by shock as he did not dare think deeper, afraid that he would place himself on the trajectory of losing control. Dunn nodded slightly and walked to a cupboard. He suddenly reached out his hand and pulled open its wooden door. The bread inside was moldy and there were about 7 gray, stiff dead rats. "Leonard, go downstairs to get patrolling cops and explain the situation here," instructed Dunn. "All right." Leonard turned and left the apartment. Following that, Dunn opened the door to 2 other bedrooms and did a careful search. After being certain that there were no clues as well as any sign of the Antigonus family's notebook, Fry also stood up. He wiped his hands with a white handkerchief he brought along with him and said, "The time of death was more than 5 days ago. There are no external injuries nor are there any clear signs that it was a result of beyond our powers. The exact cause of death will require a postmortem." "Did you discover anything?" Dunn turned to look at old Neil and Klein. The 2 who were no longer in spirit vision state shook their heads in unison. "Apart from the corpse, everything else is normal." "Actually, no, there was an invisible energy sealing the apartment in the beginning. As you know, there will usually be similar processes when we use ritualistic magic," old Neil thought for a few seconds before adding. Dunn was just about to say something when he looked outside the door. A few seconds later, Klein and old Neil sensed something and turned to look at the stairwell. A few seconds later, faint footsteps grew louder as Leonard walked up with a policeman. The policeman's expression changed once he caught the noxious smell. He immediately cooperated with his colleague from the Special Operations Department and began knocking on the doors of the residents on the 2nd floor to gain an understanding of the situation on the 3rd floor. Moments later, the corporal with his 2 silver chevrons looked at the corpse on the rocking chair. Katie Stefania Bieber. Between 55 and 60 years old. Widow. Has rented this apartment with her son, Ray Bieber, for more than 10 years. Her husband was formerly a gem artisan. Her son is about 30 years old and is single. He inherited his father's trade and earns about £1.15 solely a week. According to their neighbors, they have not seen them in more than a week. Before the policeman continued, Klein already knew the critical point that followed. Missing. To be more precise, it was unknown where Ray Bieber had gone to. The ancient notebook could very well be on him. "Do you have a picture of Ray Bieber?" Dunn looked at the police officer. He was acting as the role of a high-ranking inspector. However, it was not really acting since he was indeed a high-ranking inspector on the police department's roster. His salary and various allowances were also paid according to his rank. Of course, it did not include his salary from the church. The police officer shook his head nervously and said, "I'm not sure. I'll have to return to the station to search for it. It's not typical for us to have pictures of every single person." "Got it. Continue questioning the residents on the first floor. Ask them in detail." Dunn gave the order. As he watched the police officer leave, he closed the door and turned to old Neil. "I'll leave the rest to you. If not, we will have to make all the residents sleep and obtain Ray Bieber's looks." "Yay, I don't really trust sketches based on verbal descriptions." Old Neil nodded. He took out a few thumb-size bottles from a pocket in his black classic robe and scattered the liquids in a particular order. Immediately following that, he pulled out a clump of powder and scattered it in a circle around him. Strangely, a biting smell spread and was not influenced by the nauseating smells in the room. Klein also suddenly noticed that there was an invisible force field around him. It separated him from the environment and everyone else. It was like the room in its previous state. Old Neil half closed his eyes as his lips mumbled a soft and indiscernible incantation. Without being prepared, Klein vaguely heard the words, "Goddess, give me strength, we look forward to the protection of the night." Hum. A sudden wind tore through the windows and blew up the powder. Klein's heart quaked suddenly as he felt goosebumps all over him. He found it difficult to describe. A terrifying smell that made him afraid of looking directly spread rapidly. He was confused as he tensed up, unable to relax. It felt as though he had plunged into a state similar to what one would have after working on a highly advanced mathematical problem. Suddenly, old Neil's eyes opened, his eyes pitch black. He took out a fountain pen from his pocket and began drawing on a piece of scrap paper on the table. He was so fast that his entire body was trembling. Klein focused his gaze and saw a face with recessed eyes and a tall nose bridge rapidly appear. When the natural curly short hair was done, old Neil wrote a single line beneath the portrait. Black hair, deep blue eyes. Left of his mouth is a fully ceramic tooth implant. Pada. The fountain pen in old Neil's hand fell onto the paper as his body convulsed a few times. "This is the image of Ray Bieber according to what's left in the room," old Neil whispered as the color of his eyes restored rapidly. Then, he turned back to his original spot and slowly circled it. The invisible force field that isolated things immediately dissipated in the form of a breeze. "Praise the lady." Old Neil tapped his chest in 4 spots, forming the shape of the crimson moon. Klein's taut nerves relaxed as he made more acute observations. He discovered that there was nothing special about Ray Bieber's facial features. He had a relatively mild bearing. The only thing was that his philtrum sagged clearly. "I'll try using dowsing rod seeking." He picked up the portrait and found male clothes in the bedroom and spread them onto the ground. Dunn, Leonard, and old Neil did not stop him as they watched him place the black cane above the clothes and portrait. Fry was as silent as always. Klein's eyes turned from brown to black as he finished his recitation, only to release his grip. The black cane stood silently like it was embedded in the ground. "Ray Bieber's location," Klein silently repeated to himself again. With the sound of humming wind, the cane fell down but kept changing directions while falling. Finally, it began spinning in slight circles. Without any external help, the black cane stood stably again. Klein repeated a few times with the same outcome. All he could do was shake his head at Dunn and old Neil. A strange power was interfering with his divination. Dunn took off his black glove and said to Leonard and Klein, "Take Ray Bieber's portrait and inquire the residents for a final confirmation. Following that, we will issue a warrant of arrest against him for the murder of his mother." "All right." Klein held his cane and bent down to pick the portrait. After the neighbors confirmed that the portrait was indeed Ray Bieber, Dunn instructed Leonard and the police officer to finish the procedures at the station. He and Fry headed to a few bars in Tingen City to seek help via other means. Klein and old Neil returned to Blackthorn Security Company on a public carriage. It was not even 8 by the time they arrived. Roseanne had not even clocked in. After closing the door, Klein cocked his head at old Neil and, hoping to learn and answer his questions, asked him, "Why would I send the Antigonus family's notebook to Ray Bieber's home?" This was completely in a different direction from Iron Cross Street where Welch stayed. Old Neil walked to the sofa and chuckled. "Isn't that obvious? Who knows what powers inside the notebook you invoked? Maybe you did some described ritual out of curiosity and ended up provoking a strange existence that you should not have. The motive of this existence was to have the notebook sent to Ray Bieber and sever all clues, to prevent anyone from discovering it. Therefore, apart from you who were selected, Welch and Naya committed suicide, regarding you. To be frank, I still have no idea how you survived. I would like to know too." Klein sat down as well as he deliberately replied with a wry smile. I've also thought of the guesses you have of the proceedings. However, there's one thing I don't understand. Why did I have to hand the notebook to Ray Bieber? Old Neil shrugged and said, perhaps his life path number matches the requirements, or maybe he's one of the last remaining descendants of the Antigonus family. In short, there are too many possibilities, and why the notebook was sold to Tingan City would have similar reasons. I do not think it's because he's a descendant. Klein suddenly felt enlightened before he sighed. Unfortunately, I did not discover immediately that Ray Bieber and that notebook have vanished. Old Neil laughed. This is something that Dunn has to worry about. As for you, it's something good. Why do you say so? Klein frowned in puzzlement. As a seer who had just stepped through the gates of mysticism, Klein did not dare to claim he knew much. However, he was certain he knew more than ordinary people. He was aware that the various kinds of divination arts could be split into 3 categories based on particular standards. And that standard was based on the source of the revelation. The first category of divination included tarot, poker, pendulums, dowsing canes, and dreams. By using the inquirer's own spirituality and its communication with the spirit world to gain a revelation, it could be interpreted for an answer. However, spirit pendulums and dowsing canes had very high requirements of one's spirituality, spirit body, and astral projection. Non-beyonders were unable to obtain precise or clear revelations. Card divination provided fixed symbolism, presenting even an average person's faint revelation. Dreams were somewhere in between the other forms. The second category included spirit numerology and astromancy, as well as their derived forms. The fortune teller used either the personal details of the inquirer or changes in nature before using calculations, inference, and interpretation to answer their questions. With this method, the initiative did not lie in the inquirer, but the fortune teller. The third category used an external third party, separate from the inquirer and the fortune teller. The Ouija boards that Klein was familiar with from his previous life belonged in this category. They used rituals to ask for a direct answer from the unknown or the supernatural. Even though there was a high chance that an average person would not succeed, there were cases where they managed to communicate with malicious spirits or entities that drove them to insanity. These methods of divination usually led to tragedies. The magic mirror divination that Hannes Vincent mentioned belonged to the third category. In mysticism, mirrors were connected to the unknown and mystery, like they were the doors of the spiritual world. Thus, Klein stopped outside the meeting room, intending to learn how the famous fortune teller would explain the divination. Klein wanted to ascertain if he needed to inform the captain or not, raiding him at night. Of course, there was a safe way to do the magic mirror divination. One could ask for answers from the 7 orthodox divinities. Even if it was very difficult for an ordinary person to receive any real revelations, they would not be in any danger or suffer any after effects. The magic mirror divinations that were strictly controlled by the Nighthawks and mandated punishers were those that asked evil gods or mysterious existences for help. Furthermore, the fortune teller couldn't randomly fabricate things. Some phrases or qualities had the potential to invite the attention of unknown entities. In the world where the powers of the Beyonders exist, such divinations would often lead to tragedy. Klein even suspected that the original Klein, Welch, and Nye had committed such a forbidden divination by following the instructions of the Antigonus family's diary. At that moment, Hannes also explained the principle behind magic mirror divination and described the actual process. First, you choose a suitable time and date according to the divinity you believe in. You can decide this using the astromancy manual. For example, we all know that Sundays symbolize the evernight goddess, for Sunday is the embodiment of rest. 2 to 3 in the early morning, 9 to 10 in the morning, 4 to 5 in the evening, and 11 to midnight are all related to the moon, thus, they are controlled by the evernight goddess. Thus, fortune tellers that pray to the evernight goddess can use magic mirror divination during these times on a Sunday. Quite a good foundation. Klein nodded slightly while using the half-closed door to the meeting room to conceal himself. It had to be said that with the 7 major churches keeping each other in check, some mysticism knowledge had indeed leaked. For example, many of the meanings behind the symbolism could be found in the astromancy manual. However, without the potions or beyonder powers, ordinary people were unable to obtain the desired effects. Second, we must scrutinize the mirror carefully. It must be a mirror coated with silver. You place the mirror at the position representing the moon, Hannes demonstrated with the prop in his hand. No, what he needs now is spirit dowsing. First, choose a position and recite the phrase, "This place is suitable for magic mirror divination" 7 times in your head, then see which direction the pendulum turns. Clockwise for true, counterclockwise for false. Of course, if you are asking for answers from a malicious supernatural entity, the position would not matter. Rather, it would depend on whether the entity is interested in answering your questions. Klein silently corrected him. At this point, he felt like a teacher listening in on a lesson. Hannes Vincent could not hear Klein's mental musings as he described the preparations in detail in a normal tone. When the members finished taking notes, he continued explaining, after showering, confirm that you have drawn all your curtains and locked your doors. After that, light up a candle and place it in front of the mirror before sincerely praying to the divinity you believe in. Try to keep your questions simple as there's no need for fanciful embellishment. After praying 7 times, pick up your mirror and gently toss it on the ground. Make sure to be gentle, remember the way it shatters as that is a revelation from the gods. I will tell you the main symbolisms in a second. Phew, this is orthodox magic mirror divination. Klein heaved a sigh of relief as he walked into the meeting room and sat back down in his previous seat. He finished the rest of his Southville coffee in one gulp. So-called orthodox divination meant that it was possible to obtain revelations, but it was impossible to truly interpret it. And for beyonders who reached this step, they could look straight into the mirror to obtain clear information if they received a response. As there were many potential symbolisms after the shattering, Hannes taught for a long while. He was not done even when Edward Steve returned to the room after finishing his fortune-telling. Klein did not ask what Edward did for his fortune-telling or what method did he use since it was an unspoken rule among fortune-tellers. While acting as a seer, he naturally had to abide by it strictly unless the other party mentioned it. I discovered that many a time, our interpretation is too vague, as though it's meeting different requests, allowing different people to find a description of themselves from the interpretation. Edward drank a mouthful of black tea and said with a soft sigh. For example, those that encounter adversities and calamities will eventually see the light of hope. Heh, but no one knows when the light of hope will come. For example, a journey might not be very smooth sailing, but you will definitely arrive alive. The dead will not retort me. As he did not listen from the beginning, he ignored Hannes's magic mirror divination class. Survival bias, added Klein with a smile. Survival bias generally meant that a lot of statistics would only include those who were alive and lucky. The data would ignore the dead, therefore, the results would be clearly biased. Right. Emperor Roselle was really a philosopher, marveled Edward. Speechless, Klein raised his empty cup and pretended to take a sip. The members were fully immersed in the study of horoscopes and magic mirror divination the entire afternoon. Occasionally, they would also discuss with Klein and Edward. And when that happened, Klein would try his best to meet his duty as an informal member of the Nighthawks. He would try hard to steer the topic away from anything related to beyonders or dangerous ideas. However, he failed at the thing he wanted to do the most. A few inquirers came, but none of them picked him to do their fortune-telling. Perhaps I have to be more proactive in entertaining them. Should I use a few phrases like you are plagued with bad luck, you have been unlucky recently, or nothing you do will happen smoothly? No, that's nothing like a seer. With this in mind, Klein could not help but shake his head in self-deprecation. He picked up his cane, stood up, and left after bidding everyone farewell. At 5:30, Edward Steve put on his coat and was prepared to walk out the divination club when he suddenly saw a familiar figure. Good afternoon, Glassy. Long time no see, he greeted with a smile. He saw his friend with similar interests as him wear his usual format suit with a black bow tie. In front of his chest hung a monocle. Immediately following that, he noticed that his friend did not look well. Even his soft blonde hair looked dry. Good afternoon, Edward, coughed. Glassy with his hat in hand suddenly used his fist to cover his mouth as he coughed a few times. Edward asked out of concern, you seem to be ill. A very serious illness. It even turned into pneumonia. If it wasn't for my wife who met an impressive apothecary and gave me a magical medicine, you would have probably had to visit me at the cemetery. Glass's tone was filled with a lingering fear and joy. Lord, I can't believe it. You were so healthy previously? Look at you, you look so frail now. I remember when I did divination on you, there were no signs that indicated that you would get a serious illness. Edward waved his cane and said with an astonished sigh. My own divination had the same result as yours. Perhaps we are not qualified fortune tellers. Besides, Glassy suddenly recalled the happenings on Monday as his expression turned abnormally serious. At that moment, the beautiful lady, Angelica, came over and bowed with a pleasant smile. After exchanging greetings, she first showed concern for Glass's health and provided some suggestions. Then, she mentioned in passing, Mr. Glassy, Mr. Moretti, who requested your divination services previously, has joined our club as well. The one who got me to tell his fortune. Glass's eyes lit up immediately. Lord, where is he? He just left. Angelica and Edward were unable to comprehend Glass's abnormal reaction. Glassy took 2 steps in agitation and said, "The next time he comes, please ask him when he will come if I'm not around." Glassy, what happened? Did that Mr. Klein Moretti do something to you? Asked Edward in puzzlement. Glassy raised his arm and stared straight into Edward's and Angelica's probing gazes. He said in excitement, "He's a very, very, very magical." He lowered his arm and said after using very thrice, "Doctor." 7:30 in the evening, around the Moretti family's dining table. Klein, why do you need to be at work so early as a consultant? Would emergency matters at the security company be more dangerous? Benson forked a potato from a dish of potato stewed beef as he raised the matter in concern. Klein carefully spat out the bones from a pan-fried dish and gave his prepared answer. A batch of historical documents needed immediate shipping to Backland. I had to be present to handle the handover and make sure there was nothing missing. As you can guess, the bunch of fist-swinging bastards don't know any FASAC. Upon hearing his answer, Benson, who had finished chewing his food, could not help but sigh. Knowledge is truly important. Making use of this opportunity, Klein took out the remaining £5 note and handed it to Benson. "This is my additional payment I received today. It's time you get some decent clothes too." £5. Benson and Melissa said in unison. Benson took the note and looked at it repeatedly. He said in both shock and doubt, "This security company sure is generous." His weekly salary was £1.10 solely, which meant £6 exactly every 4 weeks. He only earned £1 additional from this additional payment. And with that salary, he had managed to support his siblings, giving them a decent place to stay and allowing them to eat meat 2 to 3 times a week. Every year, they could get a few new clothes. "Are you doubting me?" Klein deliberately returned with a question. Benson chuckled. "I doubt you have the ability nor the guts to rob a bank." "You aren't someone who can lie," Melissa answered seriously after lowering her fork and knife. "I am now someone used to lying." Klein immediately felt a little ashamed. Although it was a result of the circumstances of his reality, his sister's belief in him left him melancholic. "It was relatively urgent and important today. I also played a crucial role, which is the reason for the £5, Klein explained. In a way, what he said was the truth. As for the £5 that he would be reimbursed with, the one he would use to join the divination club, he planned on concealing it. Firstly, if he brought £5 home again, he would truly scare his siblings, making them suspect he was doing something illegal. Secondly, he had to save to buy additional materials to practice being a seer and to grasp more mysticism knowledge. Benson bit off a mouthful of wheat bread in satisfaction and thought for more than 10 seconds. "The work I'm at doesn't need any decent clothes. Well, to be precise, the clothes at home are sufficient." Without waiting for Klein to persuade him, he suggested, "With this additional income, we would truly have savings. I plan on buying a few books on accountancy and studying." Klein, Melissa, "I do not wish that my weekly salary remain below £2 in 5 years. As you know, my boss and manager have shit for brains. Their mouths stink the moment they open them." "Excellent idea," agreed Klein. He also took the opportunity to steer the conversation. "Why don't you read some of the grammar books in my room? To be truly dignified and to earn a handsome pay, that's something rather critical. Perhaps, in the times to come, the civil servant examinations will appear in Lone Kingdom. Preparing ahead of time would give him the advantage." Benson's eyes lit up when he heard that. "I've indeed forgotten about that. Here, let's toast to a beautiful future." He did not drink rye beer. Instead, he poured clear oyster soup into 3 cups and clinked his cup with his siblings. After drinking the clear soup, he looked at his sister who was wrestling with the pan-fried fish. He chuckled and said, "Aside from Benson's books, I think Melissa needs a new dress too." Melissa looked up and shook her head incessantly. "No, I think it's best to save it up." Klein finished the sentence for her. "Yeah." Melissa nodded in agreement. "In fact, if you do not seek the best fabrics and the newest designs, it would not be too expensive. We can save up the remaining money," said Klein in a manner which did not allow for disagreement. Benson added, "Melissa, are you planning on wearing the old dress again to Selena's 16th birthday bash?" Selena Wood was Melissa's classmate and good friend. She came from quite a good family background. Her elder brother was a practicing solicitor and her father was a senior employee of Backland Bank's Tingen branch. However, the so-called bash was only a dinner invitation to friends where they chatted and played cards. "All right." Melissa lowered her head and mumbled a response. Then, she ruthlessly forked a piece of stewed beef. After a short silence, she suddenly recalled something and looked up abruptly. Mrs. Shod from next door got her maidservant to send a calling card over. She wishes to make a formal visit on Sunday at 4 in the afternoon tomorrow. She wants to get to know her new neighbors. Mrs. Shad. Klein looked at his siblings, confounded. Benson rapped the side of the table with his fingers and appeared to be thinking. Mrs. Shad from 4 Daffodil Street. I met her husband before. He's a senior solicitor. Senior solicitor, perhaps he knows Selena's brother, said Melissa with some hints of delight. We are at 2 Daffodil Street, Klein nodded slightly. It's imperative we get to know our neighbors, but as you know, I still have to be at the company on Sunday. I only have time off on Monday. Please pass my apologies to Mrs. Shad. With that said, he suddenly recalled the neighbors of his former life when he was young, as well as the neighbors in the apartment from Iron Cross Street. He was amused as he sighed lightly. To have formal visits. Shouldn't neighbors get to know each other through natural interaction? Haha, Klein, that's because you aren't aware. You have read a lot of newspapers recently, but you have not broached the magazines catered towards families and middle-aged women. They placed families with an annual income of £100 to £1,000 as middle class. They promoted it as the framework of the entire kingdom and praised how the middle class doesn't have the arrogance of the aristocrats and the wealthy, nor are they as crass as the low-income brackets. Benson lightly and happily explained, these magazines impart many simplified ceremonies which the aristocrats practice in their interactions. As such, it becomes a target of the middle class. Thus, this results in the differences between intimate calls, semi-formal calls, and formal calls. As he spoke, he shook his head and chuckled. Typically, gentlemen, madams, and ladies who view themselves in this class will be very particular about details. They will visit their neighbors and friends from 2 to 6 in the afternoon. It's known as a morning call. Morning call? Klein and Melissa asked in surprise. Why was a visit from 2 to 6 in the afternoon a morning call? Benson put down his fork and knife, threw his hands up, and smiled. I do not know why either. All I did was read the magazines my female colleague brought. Yeah, perhaps it's because they wear their morning gowns to make the call. Morning gowns were a form of formal attire worn during mass or gatherings. Later, it was considered as formal attire for the day, different from the formal attire for evening functions. All right. Remember to buy some good coffee powder and tea leaves in the afternoon. Buy some muffins and lemon egg tarts from Mrs. Smearon. We must not ill-treat our neighbors. Klein chuckled as he dipped his remaining bread into the meat sauces, grabbed some potato and put it into his mouth. The next morning was a Sunday morning. Klein finished the last mouthful of inferior tea, put down the newspapers, and wore his Hilfield top hat. Picking up his Silevler inlaid black cane, he sauntered out the door and took a public carriage to Zoutland Street. He greeted Roseanne, who was planning to sleep in the break room after finishing her night duty. After which, he went all the way down to the basement. After turning a corner, he met a Nighthawk member, Sleepless Royale Redine. She looked like a cold lady. Her brows were long and slender, sitting atop large eyes. Her hair was a silky smooth black. Good morning, Madame Redine, Klein greeted with a smile. Royale used her deep blue eyes to glance at him and nodded indiscernibly in return. The two quickly passed by each other when Royale stopped and said with her eyes trained forward, ritualistic magic is a very dangerous thing. Ah, Klein was taken aback. By the time he turned around, all he saw was her departing back. Thank you. He frowned and shouted at Royale Redine's back. After taking a left band, he quickly met old Neil inside the armory, as well as Brett, who should not have been there. Let's go to my place. I've already received the corresponding materials. Brett has agreed to watch the armory for me, said old Neil with a chuckle. Klein was immediately surprised. We aren't doing it here. Old Neil held a Silevler chest and tutted. There's no space here to practice ritualistic magic. Klein did not ask further. He followed old Neil up to the streets and took a public carriage to the Northborough suburbs. Old Neil's place was a bungalow. The garden in front of it was filled with roses, golden mint, and other materials. The moment he entered, there was a carpeted foyer. There were 2 high-backed chairs and an umbrella rack. Through the foyer was an expansive living room. The walls were plastered with light-colored wallpaper. The floors were a dark brown color. In the middle of the room was a tiny carpet with floral imprints, and placed above it was a heavy round table. Surrounding the table were comfortable long benches, single-seaters, and a piano. My deceased wife loved music. Old Neil pointed at the piano and mentioned in passing, the sofa and coffee table are in the bedrooms. Let's do the ritualistic magic in the living room. All right, Klein replied cautiously. After old Neil put down the silver chest, he laughed and said, let me demonstrate to you ritualistic magic. Make sure to observe and remember the ritual." As he spoke, he took out a fake goatskin parchment from the chest. It was specially made and it had strange pictures drawn on it with black ink that exuded a serene fragrance. Klein kept watching and finally discovered that old Neil was seemingly, likely, possibly drawing an IOU. When old Neil filled in the corresponding field with the number 30 and the corresponding pound symbol, Klein could not help but ask out of puzzlement and confusion, "Mr. Neil, what kind of ritualistic magic are you doing?" Old Neil coughed and answered very seriously, "I'll be using magic to settle that debt of 30 pounds today." "You can do that?" Klein's eyes widened as his mouth gaped. Using magic to settle an IOU. Is he trying to curse his debtor to death or create counterfeit notes? "I might not have a solution to the problem, but I can finish you instead." All sorts of thoughts appeared in Klein's mind as he looked at old Neil with an oddly. He seriously considered the possibility of calling the cops, no, of informing the Nighthawks. Old Neil shot a glance at him and said peeved, "I can see ignorance, foolishness, and the weak and shameless disbelief in your eyes. Didn't Dunn tell you the maxim of the mystery priors? Do as you wish but do no harm." Although this maxim originated from the secret and evil Moses Ascetic Order organization, Beyonders who choose the path of Moses Ascetic Order have proven that it's right through their own experiences. As long as one strictly abides to it and shows the needed fear and reverence, the risk of losing control will be minimized. The contrary has similarly been established. Your suspicion towards me is an insult to mystery priors. Sorry. Klein did not hesitate to apologize. He had indeed forgotten that Dunn Smith had once mentioned the maxim. Old Neil was not truly angry. In a blink of an eye, he chuckled. A pity. Very few Beyonders choose to be seers. There is no corresponding maxim to help you. But I have Emperor Roselle's diaries. Yes, strictly abiding to the maxim has a hint of acting. Klein suddenly came to this thought as he nodded as if in deep thought. Old Neil did not continue. He removed the vases and other items from the round table and placed them in a corner. Immediately following that, he took out both a crimson red and black candle from the Silivler chest. He explained, if ordinary people attempt ritualistic magic, they have to follow the results from astromancy or read corresponding manuals. They have to choose suitable dates and times. For example, the day representing the goddess, the period when she rules over the moon. But for us Beyonders, especially Beyonders good in this domain, there's no need for that. Our acute spiritual perception and potent astral projections are key. Of course, if you are not confident about the ritualistic magic you are attempting, it's best to choose a suitable date and time. It can increase the probability of success. Alright. This is based on a premise. Remember carefully to abide strictly by the rules. Old Neil placed 2 candles and turned to the side and looked at Klein, saying very solemnly, low-sequence Beyonders are not strong enough. Almost all the ritualistic magic they can perform are the seeking of external powers and help. Therefore, you can only consider orthodox divinities like the goddess or the Lord of Storms. Absolutely do not attempt to communicate with the unknown or unpredictable existences. Even if people believe in them or the promises recorded are filled with enticements. Believe me, don't take any chances. As long as you attempt once, you will go down a slippery slope into the abyss with no return. Any work or resistance will only slow it down with no way to change the trajectory. I'll remember, Klein said in a deep voice. However, he felt a little afraid. My luck enhancement ritual has apparently sought power from an unknown and unpredictable existence. Furthermore, I have gained powers capable of pulling people into the fog that even a senior Beyonder like the Hanged Man finds unbelievable. Well, at least I think he is a senior Beyonder. Thankfully, I haven't gone mad or have any signs of losing control. While worrying over this, he proactively changed the subject. So, Nighthawk should seek the help of the goddess. No one will stop you if you pray to the Lord of Storms. However, we are unable to tell from our ritualistic magic whether he replies with malicious intent or not. The outcome will be distorted in unpredictable ways. Old Neil successfully made Klein give up the idea in a joking manner. There was no so-called best, only necessary. After his exhortations, Old Neil picked up a crimson red candle and said, by using candles made of moonflowers and dark red sandalwood, it will represent the goddess's identity as Lady of Crimson in the ritualistic magic. He pointed to the black candles and said, candles made of night vanilla and slumber flowers represent the night. As he spoke, he placed the black candle on the top left end of the round table while the red candle was placed on the top right end. Why do we symbolize the goddess with only 2 candles? She is also the mistress of calm and silence, empress of disaster and horror, and mistress of calm and silence. Old Neil chuckled. That's right. This is something I wished you asked. Before their fall, the Moses ascetic order had a very good relationship with the church. Their beliefs and results on ritualistic magic have heavily influenced us. They believe that all objects are numeric. Every number has a spirituality, and in ritualistic magic, 0 represents the unknown or chaos. It symbolizes the state of the universe before it was born. 1 represents a beginning, the first creator. 2 represents the world and various divinities that were produced from his body. 3 represents contact between divinities and material objects to create all things. Here, using 2 candles represents the goddess, while the 3rd candle is for you. Which 2 candles and which 2 symbols to have depend on the intended effects of ritualistic magic. 3 begets all things. All things stem from 3. Klein could not help but recall certain things from his previous life. Seeing Klein listen attentively, old Neil took a 3rd candle and said, "This is the candle representing me. It's a very ordinary candle which only has a little bit of mint added. Take note that plants like roses, lemons, mint, moonflower, night vanilla, and slumberflower are beloved and cherished by the goddess." Viewing it from another angle, the 3 candles represent the bodies, spiritualities, and godhood of every person. After finishing the description, old Neil placed the 3rd candle in the middle of the round table. He then took out a bottle of concocted full moon essence oil, a huge cauldron engraved with the dark sacred emblem, a silver knife with gorgeous patterns, a cup of water, and a saucer of coarse salt. To beyonders who are not good at ritualistic magic, there is a need for bells, crystal balls, xylivler cups, incense, or other supplementary items. However, mystery priors and seers have no need for that. These artifacts are already sufficient. Old Neil placed the fake goatskin parchment with the IOU just below the cauldron and used a special quill to hold down one corner. He turned to Klein and said, "Ritualistic magic needs a clean spiritual environment where you will not be disturbed. And that requires us to create it. The steps are to first enter cogitation. Focus your mind, and with the supplementary items, draw out our strength and construct it around us." For example, Ray Bieber's house had used holy night powder, while I'll be using a ritual silver dagger. Throughout the entire process, we have to go according to the outcome we desire to confirm the symbolism and corresponding incantation. Incantations are best done in Hermes because ancient Hermes stemmed from nature. It's akin to ancient Dragonish and ancient Alevalish. The effects are very direct, lacking the necessary concealment and protection. It easily causes the caster to fall into danger. This is also why it has been modified. However, it's more effective. Alright, I have to focus on the ritualistic magic. I won't explain things to you any further. Pay attention by watching and listening. Remember any problems and ask me when everything is done. Alright. Klein took 2 steps back and trained his eyes on old Neil. Old Neil's eyes rapidly darkened as invisible wind around him spun. He was silent for a moment, going from left to right, then up to down, using his psyche to cause friction and consecutively light up the 3 candles. Following that, he picked up the silver knife and stabbed it into the coarse salt. Then, he chanted in Hermes. "I sanctify you, blade of pure silver. I cleanse and purify you, allowing you to serve me in this ritual. In the name of the Evernight goddess, the Lady of Crimson. You have been sanctified." After a short but powerful syllable, old Neil drew a silver knife and inserted it into a cup of clear water. Then, he raised it and pointed to the space beyond the round table. He aimed the blade tip in the periphery and took a step forward, circling the round table. Every step he took made Klein feel an invisible energy spew out of the silver knife. It was filled with spirituality as it connected with the air, forming a completely sealed wall. After walking 1 round, the altar was completely isolated from its surroundings. Old Neil stood in front of the round table and put the silver knife down. He picked up the bottle of full moon essence oil and dripped 3 drops on the black, dark red, and ordinary candles. Sizzle. A thin mist emanated as everything seemed to become veiled in mystery. Old Neil put down the glass bottle and looked at the fake goatskin parchment silently for 2 minutes. Then, he picked up the quill and drew a mark he controlled, a square that framed all the content, indicating that he was in control of the debt. Following that, he drew another cross, indicating that it was cancelled. Upon reaching this step, he picked up the parchment with one hand and tapped his glabella with the other to activate his spirit vision. Another invisible and exuberant energy bloomed as old Neil whispered a chant. "I pray for the power of the dark night. I pray for the power of the crimson. I pray for the goddess's loving grace. Please provide me with the funds to pay this IOU. Night vanilla, an herb that belongs to the red moon, please bestow your powers to my incantation. Moonflower, an herb that belongs to the red moon, please bestow your powers to my incantation. Klein was completely flabbergasted listening from the side. All sorts of thoughts arose in him. Such an incantation can work. Although it was recited from written Hermes. Isn't this way too simple and down to earth? Wouldn't the goddess be angry and multiply the debt severalfold? At that moment, the candlelight lit up suddenly. After old Neil finished his incantation, he closed his eyes for 2 minutes. He picked up the full moon essence oil and dripped 1 drop onto each of the 3 candles. Immediately following that, he grabbed the parchment and pulled it close to the candle representing me. When it ignited, he immediately threw it into the cauldron. Old Neil closed his eyes again as he seemed to sense the burning of the IOU. He opened his eyes after a moment and looked toward the black sacred emblem on the cauldron. The parchment was already completely incinerated. Praise the lady. Old Neil tapped his chest in 4 spots, forming the shape of the crimson moon. Then, he extinguished the candles in the opposite order as he lit them. After finishing everything, he used the silver knife to rip apart the invisible wall around him. A huge wind stirred immediately as old Neil heaved a sigh of relief. It's done. That's it. Klein asked in a daze. Has the IOU been settled? How? I don't know either. Anyways, it will be settled in a reasonable manner, said old Neil with a smile as he threw up his hands. This. Klein was unsure what expression or words to use as a response. Isn't this a little unreliable? This is a Taoism saying, Tao begets 1, 1 begets 2, 2 begets 3, 3 begets all things. Stop thinking about the bloody IOU. Let's discuss the ritualistic magic. Old Neil put away the candles, cauldron, silver knife, and other items with a relaxed expression. Klein really wanted to shrug his shoulders like the Americans in his previous life, but ultimately could not bring himself to do something that ungentlemanly. He turned his focus toward the ritualistic magic and threw out detailed questions that puzzled him, receiving answers from them. For example, the incantations had a particular format. As long as they were satisfied and the key meaning was expressed in Hermes, the rest could be left to one's creativity. Of course, blasphemy or disrespectful descriptions were absolutely forbidden. The mysticism class lasted until noon before old Neil coughed twice. We have to return to Zoutland Street. With that said, he grumbled in an indistinct manner, to get these bloody materials, I missed my beloved breakfast. Klein looked around both amused and puzzled. Mr. Neil, do you have a chef? Or a maidservant in charge of cooking? A weekly salary of £12 could hire several servants. According to the newspapers, with board and lodging provided, hiring an ordinary chef cost anywhere between 12 to 15 soldi a week. It did not even need £1. A maidservant to do miscellaneous chores was even cheaper. Their weekly salaries ranged between 3 soldi 6 pence to 6 soldi. Of course, one could not bear any hope of them having any culinary skills. That's not right. With Mr. Neil's debt of £30, it's only normal he doesn't hire any chefs or servants. It seems I've asked another question I should not have asked. While Klein regretted his question, old Neil shook his head without minding it. I often attempt ritualistic magic, research extraordinary items, and read corresponding documents at home, so I don't nor is it possible that I hire ordinary people as chefs, butlers or maidservants. I only hire someone to clean up the place regularly. And if they are not ordinary people, do you think they will be willing to do such jobs? I seem to have asked a silly question. It's possibly because I will not do anything that involves mysticism at home, explained Klein in a self-deprecating manner. Old Neil had long stood up, wore his round felt hat, and while walking out the door, rambled on. I seem to smell pan-fried foie gras. Once the IOU is completely settled, I'll definitely have one set. For lunch, I'll definitely eat roasted pork glazed with apple juices. No, that's not enough. I must have a sausage infused with mashed potatoes. You are making me hungry. Klein swallowed his saliva as he caught up to old Neil and headed for the nearby public carriage stop. After returning to Zoutland Street, old Neil suddenly grunted after stepping down the carriage. What do I see? Goddess, what am I seeing? He was suddenly as nimble as a 17 or 18-year-old lad. He quickly came to the roadside and picked up an item. Klein leaned close out of curiosity and looked carefully. He realized it was a wallet with fine workmanship. With his lack of experience, he could barely tell if the dark brown wallet was made of buffalo skin or sheepskin, but he noticed a small light blue logo embroidered on the side of the wallet, a white dove spreading its wings as if ready to take off. That was Klein's first impression. The second thing he noticed was the stack of paper notes in the bulging wallet. There were more than 20 gray notes imprinted with black ink, gold pounds. Old Neil opened up the wallet and pulled out the notes. When he looked at it carefully, he immediately chuckled. 10-pound notes. The honorable founder and protector, William the First. Wow, goddess, there's a total of 30 notes. There's also a few £5 notes, £1 and 5 solely notes. More than £300. That's a huge amount of money in every meaning of the word. I might not even earn that much in 10 years. Klein's breathing turned heavy involuntarily. As the amount of gold pounds was immense, picking up such a wallet was equivalent to picking up a briefcase of banknotes in his previous life. I wonder which gentleman dropped it. He can't be someone ordinary, analyzed Klein calmly. Such a wallet was clearly not a woman's. There's no need to care who he is, said old Neil with a chuckle. It's not like we attempted to divine and take money that doesn't belong to us. We should wait here for a moment. I believe the gentleman will soon be back searching for it. It's not something that can be given up no matter who it is. Klein heaved a sigh of relief. He had a brand new understanding of old Neil's morals. He was rather worried that he would have used the goddess's bestowment as an excuse and paid off his debt. He was still wondering how to prevent it and persuade him otherwise. Is this do as you wish, but do no harm? Klein suddenly learned something new. The duo did not wait more than a minute by the streets when a luxurious four-wheeled carriage zoomed over. Its side had a light blue logo with a dove spreading its wings. The carriage stopped, and a middle-aged man dressed in a black formal suit with a bow tie of the same color alighted. He looked at the wallet, took off his hat, and said politely, "Sirs, that should be my master's wallet. Your logo is proof of everything, but I need to make additional verifications. This is to be responsible for all parties. Might I ask how much money is there in the wallet?" replied old Neil politely. The middle-aged man was taken aback as he said in a self-deprecating manner almost immediately, "As a butler, I do not know how much money master had in his wallet. Sorry. Please permit me to ask." "As you wish." Old Neil gestured for him to do as he pleased. The middle-aged man walked to the carriage's side and through the window, conversed with the person within. He approached Klein and old Neil again and smiled. "More than £300, but less than £350. My master does not remember the exact number." "Does not remember, that's really some filthy rich guy. If I had that much money on me, I would definitely be counting it again and again." Klein was filled with envy. Old Neil nodded and handed the wallet back. "With the goddess as proof, this belongs to you." The middle-aged man took the wallet over and did an estimate before pulling out 3 £10 notes. "My master is Sir Deweyville. He wishes to commend your morals. This is what an honest person should receive. Please do not reject it." "Sir Deweyville? The one who established the Deweyville Trust. The Sir Deweyville who provided cheap rental apartments to the working class." Klein immediately remembered the name. He was a knight that his brother respected but did not believe was grounded in reality. "Thank you, Sir Deweyville. He is a kind and generous gentleman." Old Neil did not stand on ceremony as he received the 3 notes. After watching Sir Deweyville's carriage depart, he turned to look at Klein when he saw that there was no one around. He flicked the notes and chuckled. £30. The IOU is settled. I said it will be settled in a reasonable manner. This is the power of magic. Holy F-seeking power of magic. That actually works. Klein was once again flabbergasted. A few minutes later, he entered the building stairwell and while heading to the security company, he asked puzzledly, "Mr. Neil, why didn't you ask for more money?" "Do not be greedy. One must take care not to be greedy when doing ritualistic magic. Temperance is a critical trait needed by every mystery prior if they wish to live long," explained old Neil happily. In a huge ballroom, candles were burning on a few chandeliers, emitting a fragrance that soothed the minds of people. By the sheer number of candles, they produced a light in no way inferior to that of gas lamps. There were long tables with pan-fried foie gras, grilled steak, roasted chicken, fried tonfish, desi oysters, mutton stew, cream soup, and other delicacies. In addition, there were bottles of Miss Champagne, Ormure grape wine, and Southville red wine. They were all glistening with a tempting glow under the light. Servants in red vests carried trays with crystal cups and shuttled between the gentlemen and ladies dressed both elegantly or gorgeously. Audrey Hall was wearing a collared, high-waisted, pale white dress with engagements. Her corset was tightly fitted, while her voluminous layers were puffed up perfectly with a cage crinoline. Her long blonde hair was coiled up in an elegant bun and the earrings, necklace, and ring she wore sparkled brightly. At her feet were a pair of white dancing shoes that were stitched with roses and diamonds. "How many petticoats am I even wearing?" 5. 6. Wearing white silk gloves, Audrey caressed her crinoline gently with her right hand. Her left hand was holding a glass of clear champagne. Audrey was nothing like her usual self, usually placing herself center stage of banquets and making her the focus of attention. Instead, she avoided the bustle and quietly stood in the shadows of hanging curtains by the French windows. She took a sip of champagne as she watched the crowd as though she did not belong. Count Wolf's youngest son is chatting with Viscount Conrad's daughter. He likes to move his forearm to reinforce what he says. The bigger the movement of his forearm, the more unbelievable his words. That is something gleaned from experience. He can't stop trying to elevate himself by putting other people down. However, he can't help but feel guilty. It can be seen by the way he talks and his body language. Duchess Della has repeatedly covered her mouth while laughing with her left hand today. Ah, I see. She is showing off her pure ocean blue sapphire. Her husband, Duke Nagin, is discussing the current situation with a few conservative nobles. Since the banquet began, he has searched for Duchess Della once. They almost never make eye contact. Maybe they aren't as in love as they pretend to be. Baron Larry has made Madame Parnes laugh 7 times. That's very normal, nothing strange about it, but why does she look at her husband with guilty eyes? Oh, they have gone their separate ways. That's not right, the directions they are headed leads to the garden. In the extravagant banquet, Audrey saw many details she never noticed in the past. There was an instant where she nearly believed that she was watching an opera. Everyone is a good opera actor, she sighed silently as her eyes remained limpid. At that moment, she suddenly sensed something and turned her head. She cast her gaze onto a dark corner in the large balcony outside. In the shadows was a huge golden retriever sitting there silently. She was looking inside at Audrey while half her body was hidden in the darkness. Susie. The corners of Audrey's mouth twitched as her expression instantly changed. She could no longer maintain her state as a spectator. An ancient 3-masted sailboat was navigating through a tumultuous storm in the sea. It was not fast and its displacement was lacking. With the weather and the sea looking like a cataclysmic scene, the sailboat was like a withered leaf separated from its tree. However, regardless of how the typhoons rampaged or how terrifying the waves were, it continued sailing peacefully without any signs of tilting. Alger Wilson stood on the empty deck as he looked at the massive waves that resembled mountains. His thoughts were a mystery. It's going to be Monday again, he muttered silently to himself. It was the day belonging to Mother Earth, the beginning of a series of waxing and waning. However, it meant something different to Alger. It belonged to a mysterious existence forever enveloped in grayish-white fog. At least I haven't been reduced to a madman. He stopped looking around as he gave a self-deprecating chuckle. At this moment, one of the only few sailors he had leaned over and asked reverently, "Your Grace, where are we setting course for this time?" Alger surveyed his surroundings and said in calm voice, "Pursue the listener from the Aurora Order." The storm subsided as mist emanated. On a strange sailboat with cannons on board, an 8 or 9-year-old boy with soft yellow hair was looking at pirates around him in fear. They were disorderly, some enjoyed barrels of beer, some swung around with ropes, others mocked each other, and some even fought with their fists. He turned to look at a black-robed man standing in the shadows. He suppressed his voice and asked, "Father, where are we going?" 5 days ago was his first time seeing his father, a father who proclaimed to be an adventurer. If not for the oil painting his late mother left him that confirmed his father's identity and the fact that the orphanage had opened its doors to him, he was absolutely unwilling to leave his hometown and follow his only kin who was also nearly a stranger. The man in the shadows lowered his head and looked at his son. With an amiable expression, he answered, "Jack, I'm bringing you to a holy place, a holy residence where the Creator once lived." "Is that the kingdom of God?" "We mortals can only enter by winning His grace." Jack had been well educated by his mother and knew this much. He was both surprised and fearful about the matter. Standing in the shadows, the man had an unforgettable jawline as though he was a sculpture chiseled by the best artisan. He placed his hand to his ear and made a listening pose. He replied in a tone that sounded like sleep-talking, "Jack, mortals are a wrong concept. The Creator created this world and He is everywhere. He exists in every living being. Therefore, all beings have godhood. Once the godhood attains a particular level, they can become an angel. The 7 fake gods at present are only powerful angels. Look, I can now hear the teachings of the Creator. Ah, how extraordinary is this revelation! Life is only a tour of the spirit. When the spirit is sufficiently potent and resilient, we can find our godhood and fuse with even more godhoods." Jack could not understand the complicated description. He shook his head and asked another question he previously did not have the chance to. "Father, I heard from Mother that after the Creator created this world, He split into all beings and does not exist in actuality. Then, why does His holy residence exist?" As a 7 to 8-year-old child, he was logical. The man with the chiseled face was taken aback. He turned his head away as though he was listening to more murmurings. Suddenly, he slumped down, knees on the deck. His exposed skin protruded black shards. He clenched his head with both hands as his expression warped and he shouted in extreme pain, "They are lying." After lunch, having had old Neil promise him that he would bring him to the underground market the next time he went, Klein slowly returned to the Blackthorn Security Company. He chose the two options of reading the documents in the staff office and practicing his abilities, or take the opportunity to go out and act as a seer in the divination club before Captain Dunn stopped him. However, before he could make the decision, he saw Dunsmith walk in. He was dressed in the usual black windbreaker and hailful top hat. "Captain, any updates?" Klein thought of the whereabouts of the Antigonus family's notebook as he asked with concern. Without showing any signs of fatigue in his gray eyes, Dunn said, "The facts have corroborated that the Antigonus family's notebook is in Ray Bieber's hands. However, he has vanished completely. I have already informed the various Nighthawk teams of this matter through a telegram. They were requested to pay attention to the various piers and steam locomotive stations. The first batch of printed portraits was mailed out yesterday afternoon and will be printed in various major newspapers. How nice it would be if there were phones, fax machines, surveillance cameras, and big data. What a pity. I know how to use all of them and even understand a little of the logic behind it." Klein exhaled silently. "But regardless, we can consider ourselves as having found the notebook. And this is all thanks to you. Of course, it still needs another round of confirmations. I have already sent a telegram to the Backlund Diocese, requesting them to escort sealed artifact 22049 here. It was once a dangerous item of the Antigonus family. It can help us know if Ray Bieber is a descendant of the Antigonus family. A grade 2 sealed artifact, dangerous. They can be used with care and moderation." Klein had originally wanted to ask about the sealed artifact, its special abilities, and the danger it posed out of curiosity, but he instantly recalled that he lacked the necessary clearance. He had no choice but to give up. "May Goddess bless us." Klein tapped 4 spots on his chest, forming the sign of the full moon. Dunn pushed open the door to his office and said with a slight nod, "The goddess has always been protecting us. Klein, if you had not chosen seer, you would be a formal member after this matter is verified. You could have chosen sleepless, but to be frank, I'm still puzzled over your choice. Although corpse collector is quite off-putting, you have seen daily as well. You should know that spirit mediums vary in strength. As for mystery priors, they're a good choice too. At the very least, you have old Neil as a role model, so he will make sure the risk of losing control is minimized." With regards to this question, Klein had prepared an answer from the beginning. He just never had a chance to use it since Dunn did not ask. He was only able to answer in passing. He organized his words and said, "My considerations stem from the fact that seers and mystery priors are considered beyonders with a support role. They do not need to always face enemies, for that's too dangerous. And both you and old Neil said that in the domain of mystery and beyonders, curiosity and experimentation usually brings about terrifying outcomes. Describing mystery priors as prying mysteries made me worried. As you know, I was only an ordinary graduate not long ago. A lack of guts is the only reason I made such a choice. I have to say that this is a very reasonable answer that goes beyond my expectations." Dunn massaged his temples and chuckled. He turned halfway as his gray eyes sized up Klein. "Continue going out for now. Do not limit yourself to the paths leading from Welch's Place to Iron Cross Street. Perhaps you might sense the notebook and help us confirm Ray Bieber's location." "All right." Klein realized that he no longer need to be in a dilemma. He bade Dunn farewell and turned around, his heart beginning to count. 3, 2. "Hold on," shouted Dunn. Klein turned his head and smiled. "Captain, is there anything else?" Dunn coughed slightly and said, "Well, support beyonders have to fight their enemies from time to time. Although seers sound like they can avoid such battles, they are not to be ignored. You have to maintain your shooting skills and work on increasing your strength. This is what I'm working hard towards." Klein pointed outside. "I'll be leaving." "All right." Wait a moment." Dunn shouted for him once more. As he pondered, he said, "Perhaps I have to consider hiring a combat trainer for you. Of course, this matter is under the premise that you become a formal member." Klein responded tersely before asking carefully, "Captain, is there anything else?" Seeing Klein's unbelieving eyes, Dunn shook his head and smiled. He emphasized again, "Really, nothing." Only then did Klein walk past the partition divider. He bade farewell to Roseanne and Mrs. Oriana and headed to the shooting club for practice. With all of this done, he went to the divination club and saw the beautiful Angelica standing there reading newspapers leisurely. Home, Klein silently read. With the cane in hand, he walked over and greeted with a smile. Good afternoon, Madame Angelica. Good afternoon, Mr. Moretti. In no rush, Angelica put down her magazine. She stood up and said, not long after you left yesterday, Mr. Glassy came. He just recovered from a major illness. Klein heaved a sigh of relief as he smiled. That sure is something worth celebrating. Upon hearing this, Angelica, who was secretly observing him, lowered her voice and asked out of curiosity. Mr. Glassy said that you are a very, very, very magical doctor. Are you? What? Klein looked at the lady in front of him, suspecting if he was hearing things. What made him think I'm a doctor? Even I do not know. Upon seeing Klein's odd expression, Angelica immediately felt her beliefs waver. Is that so? Mr. Glassy mentioned that you were able to tell of an ailment in his lungs simply from observation. Her voice softened until she finally shut up. Observation. A dark glabella. Klein was instantly enlightened as he shook his head with a chortle. I believe Mr. Glassy was mistaken. He was planning on being perfunctory, but after recalling that no one sought his divination services the entire afternoon yesterday, his mind whirled. It affected his goal of acting as a seer, so he explained, it's actually a form of divination. Divination? But Mr. Glassy only mentioned that you observed his face. That's also considered divination? Asked Angelica in shock and doubt. Klein smiled, composed. As a member of the divination club, you should know about palm reading, right? Palm reading was not patented by the Foodaholic Empire. Even on Earth, India and Old Europe had developed similar principles, much less in a world with beyonder powers. I know about it, but it seems you did not read his palm. Were you observing him in secret? Asked Angelica curiously. I was using face reading. Klein cooked up a lie. Its principles aren't very different from palm reading at a fundamental level. Really? Angelica's eyes were filled with disbelief. In order to develop his career as a seer, Klein chuckled. He pretended to be in thought as he tapped his glabella twice. He focused his eyes and Angelica's aura presented itself. Her head was purple, her limbs were red, her throat was blue, there was no problems with her health except for some colors being duller. However, that was a manifestation of ordinary fatigue. Klein then looked at her emotions. She saw orange mixed in with some red and blue. It also meant warmth coupled with some excitement and thought. Thankfully, after realizing that there was nothing abnormal about her, Klein planned on deactivating his spirit vision. But it was at that moment when he suddenly saw rich darkness hidden in the depths of her emotional colors. Furthermore, she is lacking a little of white in eagerness to improve, Klein nodded while in thought. Mr. Moretti, were you reading my face? Seeing the young gentleman in black in front of her turn silent abruptly while seriously sizing her up, Angelica keenly noticed something. She asked in a half-curious and half-worried manner. Klein did not immediately reply. Instead, he tapped his glabella lightly as he wore a look of scrutiny. Just as Angelica was feeling unease, he said warmly, Madame Angelica, there are some sorrows and pains which you should not seal in your heart. Angelica's eyes widened as her mouth turned agape. However, she did not say a word. She looked at Klein in his half-filled top hat with an apparent scholarly bearing. He heard him use a deep, comforting and warm voice to say, you need to either go mountain climbing, a game of tennis, or perform a tragic play to exhaust your body due to exercising. Let your tears flow down uninhibited, then cry and scream. Express all those emotions. That will be very helpful to your health. The moment those words entered her ears, Angelica felt like she had transformed into a statue. She stood there motionless. She tried hard to blink as she lowered her head in a fluster, saying deeply, thank you for your suggestion. It seems like there are many members here today. Klein did not continue. As though he had not done any divinations prior, he turned to his side and looked to the meeting room at the end of the corridor. Sunday afternoon, at least 50 members, Angelica's voice sounded a little hoarse. She only mentioned the key terms. She paused as her vocal pace gradually returned to normal. Do you want tea or coffee? Sigh black tea. Klein nodded slightly. He politely took off his hat and slowly walked to the meeting room. Only when he vanished behind the door did Angelica exhale slowly. The divination club's meeting room was very large. It was nearly twice the size of Klein's high school classroom. In the past, only 5 or 6 members would be present, making it look extremely empty. Now, there were dozens of fortune tellers sitting in different spots. They filled up most of the room. Sunlight shone into the room through the few oriel windows. The members were either discussing softly among themselves or asking honest Vincent questions. Otherwise, they were practicing and attempting divination or drinking coffee and reading newspapers by themselves. Such a scene made Klein feel like he was back to his schooling days on Earth. The difference was that it was noisier and more rowdy back then, without the tranquility of the meeting room. He looked around, but he didn't see familiar faces like Glassy or Edward Steve. So, he casually picked up a divination textbook, found a corner, and started flipping through it leisurely. Very soon, Angelica came in with a cup of tea and left it on the table before Klein. As she was leaving quietly, she suddenly saw Mr. Moretti take out an exquisite-looking silver chain from his left sleeve. There was a chunk of pure topaz hanging on the silver chain. What is he doing? Angelica slowed down subconsciously and focused her gaze at Klein. Klein held the silver chain with his left hand and allowed the topaz to hang above the side black tea, just short of touching the surface of the liquid. With a serene expression, he half closed his eyes and the atmosphere around him suddenly turned quiet. The topaz started moving slightly, along with the special-looking silver chain, in a clockwise direction. Upon seeing this, Angelica found Mr. Moretti extremely mysterious. "The black tea you provide is great," Klein said softly after he opened his eyes with a smile. His actions were intentionally done for Angelica to see. If he wanted people to select him for his divination services, Angelica's recommendation was a very crucial factor. Since he wanted to act as a seer, Klein no longer had any reservations. He completely personified the identity. "Yes, Mr. Vanez is very picky about the quality of tea," Angelica said, stunned. Klein put away his spirit pendulum by winding it properly. Then, he raised the white porcelain cup with floral design. With a smile, he gestured politely at her with his cup. Angelica returned to the reception hall, but she no longer had the mood to read magazines. She sat there, gazing into the distance. It was a wonder what she was thinking about. This continued until there were knocks on the door. She jolted awake and hurriedly looked at the entrance, only to see a lady dressed in a light blue dress. The lady took off her veiled hat with a powder blue ribbon. She looked calm and melancholic. "Good afternoon, esteemed lady. Would you like to join the divination club, or are you looking for a divination?" Angelica asked like clockwork. "I want a divination." The lady had a beautiful pair of eyes hidden with sorrow, and she bit her lower lip as she spoke. Angelica guided her to the sofa and explained to her how the divination club worked in detail. She picked up an album and handed it over. "You can pick anyone." In her low spirits, the lady flipped through the album seriously. As there were too many club members there that day, there were too many choices. It left her quite upset. "Can you recommend one? From these few pages." She pointed at the middle section of the album, omitting the fortune tellers priced above 2 soldi and those below 4 pence. Angelica took the album and looked at it for a few minutes. She deliberated her words before saying, "I suggest this gentleman." The lady who looked uneasy took a glance and realized that it was a fortune teller named Klein Moretti. "Mr. Moretti just joined the club, is his divination reliable?" she asked worriedly. Angelica nodded with great affirmation. "Another member of the club and I are certain that Mr. Moretti is an outstanding fortune teller. If it wasn't for his just joining the club, he wouldn't take such low fees." "I understand." The depressed girl nodded. "I'll pick Mr. Moretti for a divination then." "All right, please hold on for a second." Angelica took the album and walked towards the meeting room. She came next to Klein and said with a suppressed voice, "Mr. Moretti, someone wants you to divine for them. Which room would you like to use?" That was effective. "My first business is here." Klein put down his teacup and nodded calmly as he said, "Topaz room." "All right." Angelica walked slowly ahead of him and led him to Topaz room before opening its wooden door. Klein sat behind the table that had various divination tools on it. He waited less than a minute before he saw a woman in a light blue dress walk in. She looked down and melancholic. Seizing the opportunity when she was closing the door, he tapped his glabella twice. "The yellow color in her stomach seems a little dull, the dark color of her emotions is very heavy, mainly worry and anxiety." Klein looked her over carefully and leaned backwards. He then lifted his hand to cut off his spiritual vision. "Good day, Mr. Moretti." The woman in the light blue dress sat down. "Good afternoon, how may I address you?" Klein asked politely, not carrying much hope of getting an answer. As a keyboard warrior, he knew that many people were not willing to use their real names during divination. "You can call me Anna." The girl put her veiled cap aside. She looked at Klein with mixed anticipation and doubt, and said, "I would like to define about my fiancé's situation." He traveled to the southern continent in March for a business deal. He sent me and his family a telegram last month on the 3rd, saying that he was going to set sail and return. But he did not return after 20 days. At first, I believed that his delay was due to the berserk ocean's weather, but as of today, it has been more than a month. The ship he took, the Alfalfa, still hasn't arrived at Enmit Harbor. The ocean that separated the northern and southern continent was called the Berserk Ocean. It was well known for natural calamities and its countless dangerous currents. If it was not for Emperor Roselle, who sent men to discover a few safer sailing routes, countries in the northern continent would still have yet to enter the age of colonization, let alone lay an underwater cable to complete a transoceanic telegraph. Klein looked at his very first client of his career as a seer and asked carefully, "Which divination method do you wish to use?" Like and subscribe.